Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is The Dark Knight. Now, The Dark Knight came out in 2008, and this was co-written and directed by Christopher Nolan, and was co-written by his brother, Jonathan Nolan. Now, this is a sequel to Nolan's 2005 film, Batman Begins. Now, both this and Batman Begins are based on the DC Comics character Batman, originally created by Bob Kane Bill Finger. Now, this movie takes plot elements from several Batman comics and graphic novels, most notably Alan Moore's The Killing Joke and Jeff Loeb's The Long Halloween. Now, The Dark Knight does what more sequels should do, where you don't have to see the first one in order to understand what's going on in this one. Like, it very much works as a standalone film, while still being in continuity with its predecessor, and this is considered to be one of the greatest movie sequels of all time. It's ranked alongside movies like The Godfather Part 2, Dawn of the Dead, The Empire Strikes Back, The Road Warrior, Aliens, Terminator 2, it's considered to be one of those sequels that really has surpassed the original. Now, do I personally consider this film to be better than Batman Begins? I would say on a technical level it is, but on a personal level I do find myself rewatching Batman Begins way more often than this movie, but that's not taken away from this film. This is still a great movie. And this is considered to be not just one of the greatest sequels of all time, but a lot of people consider this to be the greatest comic book movie and the greatest superhero movie ever made, and this is considered to be one of the greatest films of all time. Now, I know a lot of people consider the movie to be overrated, and I can understand where that comes from, because there was so much hype surrounding this movie when it came out, and again, it's still considered to be the greatest comic book movie of all time, so I can understand why a lot of people would consider it to be overrated, but me personally, I think the movie deserves all the praise that it gets. And honestly, I don't think there's been a superhero movie that's had this much critical praise and this much critical evaluation and analysis. And while Batman Begins was successful when it came out, this movie became a phenomenon to a point where Begins kind of became a forgotten film for a while, and I don't know if anybody expected this movie to become as big as it did. And the same way that Batman Begins took Batman's origin and treated it as serious drama, this is still very much a Batman film, it's still very much a superhero film, but it treats it as a Michael Mann-esque crime thriller. Now, the plot of The Dark Knight is it's set a year after the events of Batman Begins, and because of Batman's actions, crime in Gotham City is starting to go down, and the mob is losing its hold on the city. And Gotham City's new district attorney, Harvey Dent, is really cracking down on the mob, and is really changing things for the better, and for the first time in years, the people of Gotham are looking to the future with hope. That is until a criminal who calls himself the Joker starts orchestrating a series of terrorist attacks on the city, and Batman tries to stop him and figure out what he wants, but then he comes to the horrifying conclusion that maybe he doesn't want anything. Maybe there are some people that you can't reason with. As Alfred says in the movie, some men just want to watch the world burn. But the Joker actually does have kind of an agenda. Basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to get people to turn on each other. He's trying to get people to abandon their morals. He's trying to prove that human beings are inherently evil. And it really becomes a battle for the souls of the people of Gotham City, of course in a philosophical sense rather than a supernatural sense. Christian Bale reprises his role as Bruce Wayne in Batman, Michael Caine reprises his role as Alfred Pennyworth, Gary Oldman reprises his role as Jim Gordon, and Morgan Freeman reprises his role as Lucius Fox. Maggie Gyllenhaal plays Rachel Dawes. Now, this character was played by Katie Holmes in the first movie. Now, I actually liked Katie Holmes in Batman Begins. I know a lot of people didn't. And I will say, arguably, Maggie Gyllenhaal did a better job in this film. The only issue with it, though, is she looks so much older than Katie Holmes did in that movie, and this is only supposed to be a year after the events of the first movie. But the performance that you absolutely have to talk about when talking about this movie is Heath Ledger as the Joker. It's a performance that won an Oscar, even though he unfortunately died a few months before the film even came out. And it's considered to be one of the greatest villain performances of all time. It's right up there with Malcolm McDowell as Alex in A Clockwork Orange. I actually think Heath Ledger said that he based a lot of his performance off of Alex. It's also right up there with Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. Now, of course, when the movie came out, there were inevitable comparisons to Jack Nicholson's performance as the Joker in Tim Burton's Batman, and to me, it's really not fair to compare the two because there's such different takes on the character. In a way, that's like comparing Jack Nicholson's Joker to Cesar Romero's Joker. To me, it's really not fair. It's the same thing now with Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. It's really not fair to compare the two performances because there's such different takes on the character, even though both performances have won Oscars. Now, Heath Ledger very much makes the Joker his own. At the same time, I think the Joker in this movie is actually very true to the character from the comics, at least in spirit. Now, the Joker in the comics is a little more chaotic than this version. This version of the character quite clearly has an agenda, but his agenda in this movie is really not that far off from the Joker's agenda in Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which definitely served as the main source of inspiration for this particular version of the character. Now, in the comics, the Joker is a man with chalk-white skin and blood-red lips and green hair, given him the appearance of a clown, but since Nolan tries to go for a more realistic approach, the Joker in this movie is really just a psychopath in clown makeup. However, he does have these two scars on his cheeks, giving him the appearance of an elongated smile. But where Nolan really does stay true to the character from the comics is there's a scene in the movie where the Joker says that he was the victim of child abuse and it was actually his father who gave him those scars. Yet later on in the movie he tells another story on how he got the scars that completely contradicts the story he told before. Now, you could assume that maybe both stories have some truth to them, or you could assume that both stories are complete bullshit. You almost get the idea that even the Joker himself doesn't completely remember who he is or where he came from. And even in the comics, like in Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, you do get an origin for the Joker in that story, but the Joker outright says at the end, sometimes he remembers it one way and sometimes he remembers it another way, and if I were to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. And there's been so much analysis of this character and so many different fan theories on who this guy is and why he's doing what he's doing. I actually came across one fan theory that I actually think has some credence. There's a part of this movie where the Joker says, if I were to tell you tomorrow, and I am paraphrasing this line, but there's a part where he says, if I were to tell you tomorrow that a gangbanger will be killed or a truck full of soldiers will be blown up, nobody will bat an eye. But if I told you one little mayor will be killed tomorrow, well, everybody loses their freaking minds. The fan theory that I came across posited the theory that when Joker is saying a truck full of soldiers will be blown up, he's actually speaking from personal experience. Like maybe the Joker was actually a Marine who was horribly scarred during a bombing or something, and maybe he's pissed off that society has kind of abandoned him or isn't giving him the credit he deserves, and maybe that's why he's doing this. Like, you do get a sense in this movie that maybe this is somebody who had something horrible done to him, and that's what set him over the edge, but Nolan very much leaves that up to the viewer's interpretation. But there's also a line of dialogue in the interrogation scene, which has kind of become the most famous scene in the movie, that kind of implies that maybe this guy was just a petty criminal before Batman came along, and the minute Batman came along, this guy decided to start doing all of this. So maybe there really is no reason for him to be doing this. But his philosophy in this movie really does seem to be a mix between anarchy and nihilism. Like, he kind of feels like there's no real point to humanity. Like, civilization is a farce. And some of what he says in this movie about society's hypocrisy actually does make sense. But it's just a brilliant performance, and you could probably do a whole essay on the Joker's characterization in this movie, and I'm sure there's been people who have. Another great performance is Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent, who becomes Two-Face by the end of the film. Now, I've said it many times before, but Harvey Dent is my favorite Batman character. And it's such a heartbreaking performance. Like, you see Harvey Dent, who is a genuinely pretty likable guy, and is a genuinely good guy who's trying to do a lot of good for Gotham City, and you see him get disfigured and twisted by the Joker, and turned into this monster by the end of the film. Like, he is such a tragic character, and that's why Two-Face is my personal favorite Batman villain, because I am a fan of tragic villains. Now, Harvey Dent's characterization in this movie is very much based on Batman The Long Halloween, which was a retelling of Two-Face's origin. And then you have Eric Roberts as Maroni, who is a mob boss that Harvey Dent is trying to take down throughout the film, and he also gives a great performance, and he's a scumbag in this movie, but there are these very brief moments of humanity, or at least that's how I kind of read it. Like, in the scene after Harvey Dent is burned, you see him at the hospital, and I always kind of got the sense that maybe a part of him feels some remorse over what happened to Harvey Dent, despite hating this guy. And then there's a scene towards the end where Harvey Dent as Two-Face confronts Maroni, and he asks him, "Do you love your wife?" And Maroni kind of clams up and says, "Yes, I do." And you could kind of tell in that moment that he's probably thinking, holy shit, this guy's gonna go after my wife. Now, he's still a scumbag in the movie, but there are brief moments of humanity, or at least there were moments where he came off as a much more three-dimensional character. But granted, that could all be owed to Eric Roberts' performance. Anthony Michael Hall and William Fichtner also have small roles in the movie. Now, as I was recording this video, my friend Matt actually stopped by, so to be a dick, I kind of forced him to be in this video. Basically, I made him do a little short review on The Dark Knight. So I'm just gonna cut to this short review, and when it comes back to me, I'm gonna talk more about some of the deeper themes within this movie.
So, Dark Knight, yes. I liked the movie. I wouldn't say it's my favorite Batman movie, but it is very good. I remember, it still holds up. Heath Ledger's performance still just as iconic as it was when it came out. I think that it was done the way it was done, it was just very futuristic, and I liked, like, the heist elements of it, it was very similar to, like, a Michael Mann movie or something like that. The intensity of it, of each scene, the tension, building tension and whatnot. The only thing I have a problem with, I think what they did with Two-Face is it was just very, he was good, but, like, the way they kind of, you didn't really see him as Two-Face a lot in the movie. You only saw him towards the end, and you didn't really see him a lot as Two-Face because he just dies. But I thought they could have had him do more as Two-Face. But one thing I will say is, with each Batman movie, and I just thought of this now, we've talked about this before, is each Batman movie has a party scene, and it seems like, and it's just funny, it's very interesting to me how that, every Batman movie, even the new Joker movie, that has a scene in a party.
Does it?
No, it doesn't. The movie theater scene.
Yeah.
Well, that's still like a gala. It was like a gala or something, one of the rich people events. It was one of those things. But it was still just the same, But I liked it, though. I do think that my favorite out of the trilogy is probably Batman Begins and Dark Knight Rises. I still think Dark Knight is a good movie, though.
Now, there are some definite political themes in the film. A lot of critics have read the way Batman handles the Joker as being sort of an allegory for George W. Bush's anti-terrorism policies. Like, you have the interrogation scene where Batman is practically beating the crap out of the Joker in order to get information out of him. And then you have a scene in this movie where Batman uses this technology to pretty much spy on all the citizens of Gotham in order to find the Joker's whereabouts. And looking at the political climate at the time this movie came out, it's kind of impossible not to see those parallels. And some critics have read the film as being a defense of Bush's anti-terrorism policies, while others have read it as being a condemnation. And I don't think the movie really gives an easy answer to that question. I think Nolan is leaving that up to the viewer's interpretation, whether or not what Batman does is right or wrong. And Lucius Fox in that scene does say, "This is wrong." But the movie does kind of play around with the idea that sometimes you have to do things that you don't like or don't agree with for the greater good. For example, Jim Gordon in this movie works with cops who he knows are in Maroni's pocket, but he doesn't really have a choice, or at least he feels he doesn't have a choice, and that's actually a reason why Harvey Dent has a lot of problems with him throughout the film, and that really comes into play by the end of the movie. And the movie does point out that Batman is a vigilante, and vigilantism is illegal, yet the cops are still working with him, but you're kind of supposed to get the idea that things have become so chaotic in Gotham City that they have no choice but to be working with Batman, the same way that the mob in the movie have become so desperate that they've turned to a man like the Joker. And in a way, you could argue that maybe the movie is saying that the Joker is right, because one of the things that the Joker is trying to get people to do is abandon their principles. And what really makes The Dark Knight so good is it takes the concept of Batman, which is a silly premise if you break it down, but it treats it as a serious crime drama, and this is also a character study on a psychopath. Now, I'm not going to pretend this is a flawless movie. I do think there are some script problems, or there are some things in the movie that don't 100% add up, like just how intricate the Joker's plans are, and the fact that everything seems to fall into place for him. It kind of requires a bit of a suspension of disbelief. And there is some dialogue in the film that I do think is a little cheesy, like, especially that line Batman has at the end, where he tells the Joker, "This city just showed you that's filled with people ready to believe in good." I'm sorry, that is a cheesy freaking line. But to me, those are just minor flaws with the movie. I don't consider this movie to be overrated at all. I think there's a reason this film is as revered as it is. And as I said, this movie became a pop culture phenomenon, and there have been so many different parodies of The Dark Knight. I particularly like the Monkey and Apple skits making fun of this movie.
I'm not picking up words. Okay. Not gonna help, the hitting. Look, I can't, I don't even know if that was a question or a declarative statement. I'm not joking, I really can't understand anything that you are saying. Nothing. Have you been to the doctor lately? Because I think you may have a very severe case of throat cancer.
I don't have throat cancer.
And this movie really did have an impact on pretty much the last 10 years of superhero films. Even though Iron Man, which was the first film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, actually came out a few months before this, I actually think the Marvel Cinematic Universe does owe a little bit to this movie, because this movie really did show that superhero films can be commercially viable and can also be taken seriously. And Captain America, the Winter Soldier, was pretty much the Dark Knight of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Or even a movie like Logan was definitely influenced by this. Like Logan, that was pretty much the Dark Knight of the X-Men movies. But yeah, that was my review on The Dark Knight, and bye.